CA 200 Institutional Correction, Module 2. Lesson 2. The History, Philosophy, and Objectives of Imprisonment and the Development of Prison. Sing Sing Prison, Auburn System, Pennsylvania System 5 Deployment of Prisoners, Forms of Punishment, Age of Enlightenment, Personalities behind Correctional Institutions, Cesar Marquez of Picaria Venezuela, Cesare Lombroso, William the Conqueror, Enrico Ferri, and Clifford Chaucer. History of Imprisonment. The original purpose of confining a person within a prison was not to punish them, but as a means of keeping the perpetrator of a crime detained until the actual punishment be carried out. This was usually in the form of corporal punishment that was intended to cause the guilty person pain, such as being beaten with a whip, or capital punishment, which is used a variety of methods to claim the lives of condemned individuals. By the 19th century, prisons were being built for the sole purpose of housing inmates. They were intended to deter people from committing crimes. Many people felt that the fear of being locked up would be enough to deter an inmate from even ever committing another crime, but other theories held that policy should be introduced to help reform prisoners before they were set free. An opposing viewpoint to the rehabilitative effects of imprisonment claims that being incarcerated will actually cause people to become even more involved with the life of crime because they become so enveloped in a criminal society while living with other inmates. So Jerry Bantam was a philosopher and author who strongly believed in a political system of utilitarianism. The idea that the best laws of society are those that benefit the largest number of people. Bentham is known for many accomplishments throughout of his life. He produced a large body of writing that influenced and supported utilitarian theories. He was a founder of the important Westminster Review publication, helped establish the University of London, and devised a unique type of prison known as the panop- panopticon. When Bentham passed away in 1832, he had his body preserved and displayed in a custom-designed cabinet he called the Auto Icon. He is considered many by the father of utilitarianism. The death penalty. During the week of September 21, 2011, three people were executed in the United States. Two of them were extensively covered in the media of different reasons. The Troy Davis case drew a lot of attention because Davis had been claiming for years he was innocent. His case drew international attention because of this involvement of public figures and prominent groups such as Jimmy Carter, Pope Benedict XV, and Amnesty International, who called their view of his case. His case led to reigniting of debates about the existence of capital punishment, namely the death penalty in the United States. So what is capital punishment? Capital punishment describes the execution of any individual who has been found guilty of certain major crimes. The term stems from the Latin words capitalis, meaning regarding the head, and originally referred to a beheading. While beheading for many years involved a sharp axe or sword, the guillotine, or arguably more human method, replaced them in 1792. Despite the origin, capital punishment now describes any form of criminal execution. Some commonly used execute methods over the years include firing squads, hanging gas chambers, the electric chair, and lethal injections. Form of detention or imprisonment. Arrest means that the act of apprehending of a person for an alleged commission of an offense whereby the action of an authority. Detained person means any person deprived or personal liberty except as a result of conviction for an offense. Imprisoned person means any person deprived of personal liberty as a result of conviction for an offense. Detention means the condition of detained person as defined above. Imprisonment means the condition of imprisonment persons as defined above. The words a judicial or other authority means a judicial or other authority under the law whose status the detention should afford the strongest possible guarantees of competence, impartiality, and independence. Philosophy of prison. Original goal of U.S. prisons was rehabilitation, alternative corporal punishment, justice of model of imprisonment. Follow just desert philosophy focus on responsibility and punishment. Objectives of imprisonment. The purpose of sentence of imprisonment or similar measures deprivative of a person's liberty are primarily protect the society against crime and to reduce recidivism. Development of imprisonment. In the late 1980s, institutions for the confinement of convicts and detention of those awaiting for trial included a variety of national prisons and penal farms, as well as numerous small local jails and lockups. In general, the national prisons house more serious offenders, and those who serving short-term sentence were held in local facilities. The government maintains 6 correctional institutions and penal farms. The nation's largest prisons was the National Penitentiary at Muntinlupa, Rizal Province, near Manila, which is also operated the Manila City Jail. The penitentiary served as the central facility for those who sentenced to life imprisonment or long-term incarceration. Some prison inmates were eligible for parole and probation before serving their sentence. Felons were not charged with supervision or insurgency or probation. Probations were required to meet with their parole officers monthly to avoid any further offense and to comply with all other imposed conditions. In 1991, crime was still serious. It somewhat reduced threat to the general peace and security of society and was aggravated by corruption in the police and court systems. The politicization of the military was seen as a long-term problem. The threat of military coup remained significant. A series of well-researched books published in the late 1880s added immensely to the available body of work in the Philippines communist insurgency. William Chapsman, Inside the Philippine Revolution's Officers, Unique Insights on the Revolutionary Movement. Richard Kessler, Rebellion and Repression in the Philippines, provide a true review of the insurgency, especially its social and cultural roots. Craig Jones' Red Revolution combines discussion of CPP's historical development with revealing interviews with communist leaders and his first-hand the reports of guerrilla commanders and political cadres in the field. Comprehensive studies of the Philippines military are few. Richard Kessler's Rebellion and Repression in the Philippines provide the most true examination of the armed forces of the Philippines and their strengths and weakness. Standard references of military capabilities include annual editions of the Military Balance prepared by the International Institute's Strategic Studies and the United States Arms Control and Disarmament Agency's World Military Expenditures and Arms Transfers. So let's go to types of prison. Prisons are designed to house people who have broken the law and to remove them from society. Inmates are locked away for a set period of time and wear very limited freedoms during their incarceration. The following are the types of prison. Juvenile. An individual under the age 18 is considered a juvenile. Medium, minimum, medium, and high security. Minimum security prisons are usually reserved for other white sellers, criminals who have committed such acts, embezzlement or fraud. Medium security prisons are the standard facilities used to house most criminals. They feature cage-style housing and armed guards and much more regimented daily routine than minimum security. High security prisons are reserved for those who are violent and dangerous offenders. These prisons include for more guards than both minimum and medium security and very little freedom. Psychiatric lawbreakers who are deemed to be mentally unfit are sent to the psychiatric prisons that are designed with resemblance to hospitals. Military. Every branch of military has its own prison that are used specifically for military personnel who have broken the laws that affect national security or to house prisoners of war. So federal versus state. Federal prisons are under the jurisdiction of the Federal Bureau of Prisons or BOP, a subsidiary of the Department of Justice. If the crime prisoners committed is federal, they will likely end in federal prisons. The exception is violence crimes, which are usually dealt with by the state prisons. As incarceration became the standard form of punishment in the U.S., the state began creating their own similar but unique prison system. Each determines how its correctional system will function. The main difference, besides offense between state and federal prisons, is the amount of time served of a sentence. Jail versus prison. Jail is locally operated short-term facility, whereas a prison is stable of federal operated long-term facilities. Jails are mainly used for detaining inmates awaiting trial or sentencing. They also house inmates who have been sentenced for less than a year. This will vary depending on the stable. Prisons are long-term facilities used after sentencing where felons and inmates are housed for more than a year. The sentencing guidelines may vary by state. Sing Sing prisons. Alcohol and substance abuse treatment program, anger management programs, educational or vocational programs, family development programs, guidance and counseling services, library and law library services, recreational programs, religious programs, sex offenders treatment, temporary release programs, trauma programs, transitional services programs, veteran services, and voluntary services and programs. In 1825, the state of New York struggled with a riddle: what to do with the criminal 2 years before they tried to complete isolations from society from one another from all stimulation. In 1901, 3 years after Edison introduced the electric chair at Sing Sing, the town changed its name to Ossining to people who couldn't fuse it with the jail. In 1828, prison was stark by gray stone box, no trace of ornamentation. These cells were 7 feet high, 6.5 feet long, and 3 and 3/4 feet wide. Today, the aviary is gone. Sing Sing is as grim as ever, and we model hopelessly over the hard question: is prison meant to reform, to punish, or just to keep criminal out of air for a season? About I doubt anyone knows. Sing Sing in a full Sing Sing Correctional Facility, maximum security prisons located in Ossining, New York, in use since 1826. It is one of the oldest penal institutions in the United States. It is also the most well-known in the country, especially notable for its condition in the 19th and 20th centuries. Originally known as Mount Pleasant Prison, it was constructed in the village of Sing Sing on the east bank of the Hudson River, some 30 miles or 48 kilometers north of the New York City. The four-story complex was soon 6 stories, and the prison eventually housed more than 1,600 inmates. Lins resigned as warden of Sing Sing in 1830 and returned to Auburn in 1838. He was asked to leave the yard after the death of prisoners who punished severely for feigning illness. Despite the disregard, Sing Sing rehired Lins in 1843. Whippings and floggings were commonplace punishments at Sing Sing. Frequently used was the cat-o'-nine tails, growing whipping contraption whose slashes were often tipped with metals or bobs. Its use was finally absorbed by the New York State Legislature in 1848. Sing Sing was also the site of reforms that affected the national penal system. Reformer Thomas Mott Osborne, who developed his penology theories while voluntarily incarcerated for a year at Auburn. So Osborne Thomas Mott, warden in 1914 to 15 and 1916 of Sing Sing Prison. Library of Congress, Washington, D.C. Early reforms: William Penn, founder of the Pennsylvania colony, ushered in the colony's first significant penal reforms in 1680. The Pennsylvania prison system. In 1787, a group of Quakers formed a group that came to be Pennsylvania Prison Society, and they lobbied for and significant reforms: a separate system, isolation and solitude, where their prisoners would have time to reflect on their crimes and become reformed. Genesis of the Auburn system. Opening in 1817 and final completions in 1823. The Auburn prison in Auburn, New York was built with a new model in mind. It used congregate system, which meant the inmates worked out and ate together but went into isolation at night. The inmates engaged in hard labor and work on the bridges, ditches, quarries, and other difficult, tedious work. Floggings, though outlawed as a sentence, became the primary means of discipline. Auburn State Prison. In the early year to the mid-19th century, U.S. criminal justice was undergoing massive reform. The state prisons, which had emerged out of earlier reform efforts, were become increasingly crowded, diseased, and dangerous. The Auburn system eventually developed several key modifications, slightly less concerned with the Quaker-inspired principle of nonviolence. When Auburn was opened in 1818, state commissioners or constructions transferred power to a local board of inspector appointed by the legislature. Recall that Gresham Powers described this office in a brief account of the New York State Prison of Auburn, 1826. They have no compensation and forbidden by law to make any contracts for purchase or sale and any articles with the agent of the prison. But in 1846, the New York State Constitution established the inspector of the state prison as an effective position. The amendment also abandoned the former system of separate government of each prison, explains the next document in this archive. Their role was also to appoint wardens and keepers, supervising prisons administrations. Each one took special responsibility over one of the 10 existing state prisons, Auburn, Sing Sing, and Clinton. In the years intervening, his stint as a president of the Board of Inspectors at Sing Sing and this constitutional amendment, John Edmonds founded the Prisons Associations of New York in 1844. They also lobbied for the separations convicted youth and adults in 1864 to 74. The following two documents in this exhibit reveal some of the tensions between the Prisons Associations of New York and the reorganization's inspector of state prisons. This position was once again appointed by the New York governor and confirmed by Senate, corrective to the partisan behavior of previously elected inspectors. The superintendent's 5-year also allied concerns about fluctuating policies of 3-year inspectors. Constructed in 1817, Auburn Prison, currently known as Auburn Correctional Facility, was the second state prison in New York. Early registered record the inmates name, country tried in crime, dates of conviction and mission sentence, alias and county received from personal details may include age, place of birth, marital and family status, residence, physical descriptions, and identifying markings. Pennsylvania system. Pennsylvania system method, penal method based on the principle that solitary confinement fosters penitence and encourages reformation. Prisoners saw no one except institutions officers and occasional visitors. Commissioned by the Pennsylvania General Assembly to revise the state criminal code. Their letters are also included revealing the questions that motivated prisoners reformers across the U.S. Northeast: disciplinary methods of architectural design, general health and cleanliness, productivity and style of inmate labor, operating costs, recidivism rates, and convict populations of demographics. Powers was a jealous advocate of the Auburn system, and his defense of here eliminates by ideological difference with the Pennsylvania reformers. Pennsylvania's Eastern Penitentiary 1829 was intended to keep convicts separate even as they work, in order to prevent any earthly contamination or destruction that might impede their repentance. Hence, the our penitentiary located on Cherry Hill on the outskirts of Philadelphia. Although Beaumont and Tocqueville found it incontestable that his perfect isolation secures the prisoners from all fatal contamination. Francis Leiber, the Prussian immigrant scholar who translated Beaumont and Tocqueville's work into English, hailed America's new penitentiary system as monuments of charitable disposition of the honest members of society toward their fallen and furnished bitter. Another prominent foreign visitor to Eastern Penitentiary was much more critical of the uncompromising solitary confinement approach. Pennsylvania, one of the richest centers of the penal reform, showcased its mode of confinement at the Eastern State Penitentiary just outside of the Philadelphia beginning in 1829. They also received access to a variety of books and other reading materials, some which has in other languages. Who are the Quakers? Quakers believe that there is something God in everybody and that each human being is of unique. That this is why Quakers value all the people all equally and oppose anything that many harm or threaten them. The difference between Pennsylvania and Auburn system. Pennsylvania system separate and silent, solitary confinement, repentance used at Western and Eastern state penitentiaries cause mental problems short lived. Auburn system congregate and silent, work in groups, repentance and hard labor used at Auburn and other prisons, New York prisons adopted by other states who were mental problems, good work habits, discipline. The different types of criminal punishment. Incapacitation, deterrence, retribution, rehabilitation, restorations. Inca, incapacitations. Incapacitation seeks to prevent future crime by basically moving criminals away from society. Types of incapacitation. Selective incapacitations. The selective incapacitations philosophy incarcerated individuals to longer periods of time than others. Collective incapacitations, the incarnation of large groups of individuals to remove their ability to commit crimes for a set amount of time in the future. Deterrence, the goal of deterrence is to persuade citizens and possible offenders and reoffenders to conform the rules of law. Specific deterrence analyzes how effective punishment is on individuals' future behavior. General deterrence seeks to understand how individual punishment can deter others from committing crimes. Marginal deterrence seeks to recognize how effective different types of punishment are either specific or general deterrence. Partial deterrence refers to situations in which the threat of penalty has some deterrent value even when someone engages in illegal behavior. For example, a criminal simply robbing a victim instead of also causing physical harm. 5 things about deterrence. The certainty of being caught is vastly more powerful deterrent than the punishment. Second, the sending an individual convicted of crime to prison isn't a very effective way to deter crime. Third, police deter crime, increasing the perception that criminals will be caught and punished. Number 4, increasing the severity of punishment does little to deter crime. Number 5, there is no proof that the death penalty deters criminals. So let's go to the retribution as one of the oldest forms of punishment. Retribution has roots in the Judeo-Christian tradition of justice. In her book Criminal Law, Lisa M. Storm explained that retribution prevents crime by giving victims or society of a certain sense of satisfaction that the defendant has been punished appropriately. Retribution is probably the oldest justification of punishment and can be found in the theories offered by Kahn and Higginbrooks in 2001. It is the fact that the individuals committed a wrongful act that justifies punishment, and the punishment should be proportional to the wrong committed. Its premise has been summarized by the philosopher Kurt Bayer as follows. Rehabilitations. A common prison policy in America up until 1970s. Rehabilitation focuses on helping criminals and prisoners overcome the barriers that led them to committing criminal acts. This includes developing occupational skills as well as resolving psychological issues such as drug addiction and aggression, explained the American Psychological Association, or APA. So restoration, a radical different approach to criminal punishment. The goal of restoration is for the offender to make direct amends to both victim and the community in which their crimes was committed. Although a relatively new practice in modern times, the concept of restorative justice can be found in the early legal systems of Western Europe, ancient Hebrew justice, and pre-colonial African societies. Age of Enlightenment. The Age of Enlightenment, also known as the Enlightenment, was a philosophical movement that estimated the worth of ideas in Europe in the 18th century. The centered idea of the reason is the primary source of the authority legitimacy. This movement advocated such as liberty, progress, tolerance, fraternity, constitutional government, and separation of the church and state. The core ideas advocated by modern democracies, including the civil society, human and civil rights, and separations of powers, are the product of the Enlightenment. National varieties. The Enlightenment took hold in most European countries, often with a specific local emphasis. For example, in France, it became associated with anti-government and anti-church radicalism, while in Germany it reached deep into the middle classes and looked a spiritualistic and nationalistic tone without threatening governments of established churches. Established churches. Government responses varied widely. Major Enlightenment ideas. In the mid-18th century, Europe witnessed an explosion of philosophic and scientific activity that challenged traditional doctrines and dogmas. The philosophic movement led by Voltaire and Jean-Jacques Rousseau who argued for society based upon reason rather than faith and Catholic doctrine. There are two distinct lines of enlightenment: the radical enlightenment, inspired by philosophy. Spinoza advocated democracy, individual liberty, freedom of expression, and eradication of religious authority. Second, more moderate variety supported by René Descartes, John Locke, Christian Wolff, Isaac Newton, and others sought accommodation between reformed and traditional system and power and faith. Impact. The ideas of Enlightenment played a major role in inspiring the French Revolution, which began in 1789, emphasized the right of humans, common men, and supposed to be the exclusive rights of the elites. Although they did eventually inspire the struggles for rights of people of color, women, and other masses, most Enlightenment thinkers did not advocate equality for all, regardless of race, gender, or class, but rather insisted that rights and freedoms were not hereditary, and rights was a common pre-Enlightenment assumption. Cesare Beccaria, she was a criminologist and economist in the early 1760s. Beccaria helped a form of society called the Academy of Peace, dedicated to economic, political, and administrative reform in 1764. He published his famous and influential criminology essay on crimes and punishments in 1768. He started a career in economics which lasted until his death. Beccaria was born March 15, 1738 in Milan, Italy. His father was an aristocrat born on the Austrian Habsburg Empire but earned only a modest income. Beccaria received his primary education at Jesuit in Parma, Italy. He could later describe his early education as fanatical and aggressive of the development of human feelings. Despite his frustration at school, Beccaria was an excellent math student. Following his education at the Jesuit school, Beccaria attended the University of Pavia when he received a law degree in 1758. That's all my report. Thank you.